What? Like, this is not my lighting. This is not my setup. Like, how is it looking so good? So, end of last year, I entered a film festival with a small group of creators called the 48 Hour Film Project. And basically what we had to do is we had 48 hours to basically figure out an idea, script, shoot, produce, edit, master, all that stuff, and upload within 48 hours. And it was a freaking insane 48 hours, insane weekend. But what was really cool is that we were actually nominated for Best Cinematography and Best Sound Design, and actually won Best Cinematography for the whole actual festival, which is really, really cool. So I figured I'd do a bit of a breakdown to kind of show you guys like the lighting setups and kind of like the camera setup and all the stuff that went into actually making our film for this festival. Now, if you haven't actually seen the film yet, then you can check out the link up here and that will take you straight to it. Watch that before you come here, just in case there's any spoilers and whatnot in here. I don't know exactly what we're going to go through. I haven't scripted any of this. We're just going to watch through it and I'm going to break down the scenes that I really liked and kind of talk through them and give you some insights. Right, so this first scene, so this is actually a really, really cool setup. This was honestly one of the favorite lightings. Let's get a better frame to pause on. This is actually probably one of my favorite lighting setups in the whole short film. Literally when I set this up and looked at it through the monitor, I was like, what? Like, this is not my lighting. This is not my setup. Like, how is it looking so good? And I think what makes this shot look so good is that there's just so much dynamic range, and that's achieved by having obviously lighting and whatnot and not blowing out the background. Because obviously, typically if we just shot into the car and we exposed for the people inside, all the background up here would just be completely blown out. Like, it would just be completely white, but it's, you know, there's information everywhere. Nothing's blown out, nothing's clipping, like, it just looks really nice. So the main light in the scene is actually a Falconized RX18T. It's actually the light that is lighting me right now. It's quite soft straight off the bat because it's quite a big panel, but because it's a flex panel, it means that we can actually gaff tape it to the roof of the car, so it's just out of frame, and that is what's actually providing all this light on this side of our main actor's face here. And it's actually the main light that's allowing us to get this high dynamic range look, where we can actually see everything inside the car and everything outside the car. And what's actually really cool and why it looks kind of, I think it looks quite natural, is that the actual flex panel was in the spot where a sunroof would be. So it kind of just looks like there's a sunroof open and all that light's actually spilling in, which I didn't really think about at the time, but like now I look at it, it kind of makes sense why it looks so good. And the second light we used was the SL200 Mark II, I believe. It wasn't actually my light, it was our first AC's Jason, who you know from this channel. And that was just to the right of frame out here. It was actually very, very close to the car because it wasn't really powerful enough to get the look that I really wanted, so I just had it as close in as possible. And that's creating this kind of like highlight over here, which is just adding some depth to our character's face. And that had no modifiers on it as well. That was literally just like the open bulb was just pointing directly at our actor. So it's kind of spilling a lot. If we had like a snoot or something, or we could have angled it or focused it more on her face, but we didn't for this shoot, so we just had to basically angle it towards her face and hope it worked. And that's also why you can see this kind of like harsh shadow up here. So obviously we had a brighter light. We could have had a bigger source and made it a bit softer, but we had to work with what we got. So we get this harsh shadow up here, which it's not ideal, but it's just what we had to work with. And finally, to the left of frame right here, we just had a little negative fill bounce. So literally this, nothing too big, but that is really darkening down this side of her face, just to, again, give more shape. So we got like, it's a little dark and then it's a bit lighter and then it gets really light here to just give some shape to the character in the scene. Now this shot I actually kind of fudged up because every other scene apart from this one, I believe I was shooting from the shadow side of the face, and there's good reason for that, and there's like a kind of like methodology behind why you do that. But this is all natural light, and you can see that obviously Ash, the main subject in this shot, has a very bright, you know, light source on this side of her face. That is actually direct sunlight. You can see it's quite harsh on her face. It's literally like half. And then Zoe over here, we actually had to put her kind of like in the shade of a tree, just so she wasn't so bright. But how I could have avoided this is if I shot on the dark side of the face. So instead of shooting over the right shoulder of Zoe, we should have shot over the left side of Zoe and then have the shadow side closest to the camera, and then we wouldn't have to deal with, you know, her being in the shadow and kind of looking a little bit weird, because like this is really bright light source on Ash over here, but Zoe kind of looks really soft, so it kind of looks a little bit weird. And also, again, just to add in a little bit more contrast and add a little bit more shape to the face, we brought in that negative fill again, which you can see here, just kind of stop any bounce coming back in and just add a little bit more contrast to this scene. I actually really like the lighting on this scene. Like, it just looks really nice. Like kind of looks quite natural, like it's an actual sunrise. That's because it is. But yeah, overall, I actually really like the look of this scene. Now, in terms of actually shooting this scene, we shot it on the Samyang 50mm T1.5, which is the Cine lens. It's actually a pretty budget lens, but the look is really, really nice. We shot most of it around kind of like T1.5 to T2.8, depending on kind of like what was in the scene and how difficult focus would have been. But I'm pretty sure this was around kind of like T1.5, T1.8, because you got that real nice depth of field and just looks really, really good. Now this was actually the first scene that we shot, and this was at 1:30 AM on the Saturday. But basically how it worked is we got 2 genres at 7 PM on the Friday, and we also got a character that we had to include, a prop and a line. So we basically couldn't really figure out anything until 7 PM on the Friday, and then we just basically had to hit the ground running and just get everything sorted as quickly as possible. We ended up finished scripting at 12:30 PM on the 12:30 AM, I guess, on the Saturday, and then we slept for an hour, and then we got up at 1:30 and we started shooting this scene, which is the very first scene that we actually shot. Now the lighting setup for this scene was actually quite simple, but what I started with is I basically figured out where the main light source was going to be in the wide. So I saw these different hooks. There was one at the back, one at the front, and one in the middle. And I basically knew that I was going to have this little lamp in the middle on the wide, and that's going to be the main light source, or where all the light's coming from in the close-up. So that basically allowed us, or gave me motivation to light from slightly behind them, because you can see in this shot the light is slightly behind them, and you can kind of see here it's like this hot edge. And I also, for this white, I put the Nanlite Pavo Tube 6C. I kind of snuck it up here, and you can see it's just kind of like adding a little bit of fill in. Probably should have added a little bit more fill, just to kind of like, so you can see their faces a bit more. But again, like, well, it's such a tight deadline for this. We didn't really have time to kind of like mess around and try lots of different things. We really had to just like smash it and finish it as quick as possible, hey? And then outside of the tent to the left of frame, you can see there's a bit of a hard edge here, and you can see some of the ground. So that was the Nanlite Mix Panel 150, and we boomed it up as high as it could go and turned it to a bit of a cooler setting. So that you can see it's kind of like adding an edge on here, so it's just like not just like this weird lit box in the middle of a black screen. And then I did have a light over on the right here. You can just see the edge, and that was actually supposed to be a warmer light, but it needs to be a little bit warmer. Oh, you can see over here, there's a bit of a bush here. Probably could have gone up a little bit, and then I should have brought it down in post. But again, like, we're just trying to rush through it to get it to look semi-decent, and I think it actually turned out pretty good. Right, now stepping inside of the tent, we obviously weren't using that little lamp to light this scene. We brought in a lot of light to make it look really good and to be able to shoot at a low ISO so it wasn't super noisy. Now this is a good example to show actually shooting on the dark side of the face. So obviously the side that's closest to the face is the dark side of her face. So we're shooting over the left side of Zoe's shoulder, and the light is coming from the right side. So you get this kind of like this dark side closest to the camera. And the main issue that shooting on the dark side solves is that the person that's kind of like in frame or that we're shooting past is a lot darker than the person that we're trying to focus on. So immediately in this frame, you're drawn to Ash's face because it's obviously the brightest part of the image. But if we were shooting over Zoe's right shoulder, then she would also be getting all this light as well, like in the other scene. And it's just really hard to kind of like bring that down and make it look natural while still being able to focus on the main person in the scene. Then the main lights in the scene that were coming from the right side of the frame were actually the Mix Panel 150 and also the Golden Eagle V100. I didn't have a light that was powerful enough to just use one light, so I had to use both of them basically at full blast just to expose properly a base ISO because they want too much noise in the image. And we're shooting both of those through just like a big bit of white diffusion, like I literally got off eBay. I think it's a Neewer 1.8 by 1.8 white diffusion. Like, it's super duper cheap, but it's allowing us to get like a bit more of a softer light. Even though like the light source was quite far away and it's not as soft as I wanted, it softened it up just a little bit. And then this top light here, this hair light, is the Pavo Tube 6C, and we boomed it in from the left side of frame, just kind of like just above. It's probably a little bit too hot, like it's kind of weird. It doesn't really make sense where it's coming from, but I just needed something to differentiate the hair from the background so we didn't just get lost. Kind of like here, it starts to get lost a bit. I think Zoe's angle, this is a little bit more natural, I think. Just not as hot, but again, we're rushing so much. It was just so hard to get everything perfect for the shoot. All right, now the final scene that we're going to go through isn't actually a lit scene, it's all natural light, but the reason I wanted to go through this is that if you plan your shots for certain angles and certain times of day, then you can get absolutely amazing light without having to do too much. So when we arrived on the Friday, we got there at about 5:30, 6 o'clock, which was just before the sun was setting, and I kind of like scoped out the area that we're going to shoot, and I noticed that the sunset basically where this is now, and I knew that it was going to absolutely burn and look absolutely amazing. Even though this scene in the film is a sunrise sequence, we actually shot it at sunset, so we had to shoot everything backwards. And then also the scene before where it's like sunset, that was sunrise, and we shot that all backwards as well. So it's kind of a little bit confusing, but we managed to figure it out in the end. So yeah, this was all set up and based around where the light would end up just before it hit the horizon. And I used an app called Sunseeker, but there's things like Photo Pills and a few other apps as well, which will actually show you where the sun is going to hit and also when it's going to hit the horizon as well. So we knew that, I don't know, this was 7:15 or something, it was going to hit the horizon. So we basically had from about 6:50 to 7:15 to kind of like keep shooting this scene. And we basically just kept shooting this scene over and over again until we ran out of light, because we knew that after we finished this, we couldn't shoot anything else, so we just had to make the most of the light that we had. And in terms of like natural lighting, like it doesn't get much better than this. This looks absolutely freaking beautiful. Now real quick, in terms of the camera setup, because I know a lot of people are gonna ask in the comments below, we're shooting on the Canon C200 in Canon RAW light, and most of the shots we shot on either 50mm or the 85mm Samyang T1.5, which is just kind of like their budget range, but I actually really enjoyed shooting on. They're actually really, like they're not like super duper sharp, but in terms of like the price to quality and the value and stuff, I actually really like them. And then for wider shots, we shot on the Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8, but I didn't really switch lenses that much. I actually shot a lot of stuff on the 50mm. Actually, probably majority of shots I shot on the 50mm, which is just kind of like that middle focal length, and we can just kind of like move around and get the shots we needed without having to kind of like change the lens so often. And of course, everything was shot with a Tiffen Pro Mist 1/8 filter. That thing is just absolutely amazing. I think literally everything I've shot since getting it has been with a Pro Mist. Like, I just don't shoot without it anymore. Right guys, that will do it for this one. If you did enjoy this video, then consider liking and subscribing. And if you want to watch the film or find out more, then I'll leave some links down below. And as always guys, stay creative and just be you. See ya.